Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Let's move to this next chapter on our topic of inheritance. The chapter of whoever leaves wealth, then it belongs to his inheritors. Let us take this hadith by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. He says that when a deceased would be brought to the Prophet, he would ask, does he have a debt or not? If the debt had been paid off, the Prophet would pray the janazah on this person. But if it was not paid off, the Prophet would tell his companions, Sallu ala sahibikum, pray for your companion. So note here that the Prophet himself would not pray. Then, when the Muslims conquered the lands and wealth came in, the Prophet said, Ana awla bil mu'minina min anfusihim. I am closer to the believers than they are to their own selves. فَمَنْ تُوَفِّيَ وَعَلَيْهِ دَيْنٌ فَعَلَيَّ قَضَاؤُهُ. So whoever dies and he has some debt pending, then I will pay it off on his behalf. وَمَنْ تَرَكَ مَالًا فَهُوَ لِوَرَثَتِهِ. And whoever leaves wealth after his death, then it belongs to his inheritors. From this hadith we learn the great matter of the debt. That initially the Prophet would not even pray on someone who had not paid off his debt, and this in order to deter other people from procrastinating in paying off their debts. If somebody else would be a guarantor to pay off the debt on behalf of the deceased, then the Prophet would pray, as we clearly find in Al-Bukhari, the hadith where a man did not have enough to pay back the debt and he died, and Abu Qatada said that he would guarantee the repayment of the debt. And so after that guarantee, the Prophet prayed. Otherwise, he was not going to pray. The Salatul Janazah is a shafa'ah. It is an intercession on behalf of the deceased. We are making dua to Allah Jalla wa Ala to forgive the deceased, to overlook his shortcomings, his errors, his sins, both minor and major. Whereas our dua can certainly be answered, but when it comes to a debt, you'll realize that this is the rights of other people. The rights of Allah Jalla wa Ala can be forgiven, but the rights of other people are not based on forgiveness. They are based on revenge and retribution. And so an intercession would not benefit for someone who has such a debt for another human being. And so we find the Prophet only wanted to pray over a deceased where his prayer, the Prophet's prayer, would save him from everything. He did not want to pray a prayer in which the Prophet's prayer would not save him from everything, such as the debt. So the Prophet said, فَمَنْ تُوَفِّيَ وَعَلَيْهِ دَيْنٌ فَعَلَيَّ قَضَاؤُهُ. Whoever dies and he has debt, then it is upon me to pay it off on his behalf. And this is because now the Muslims became wealthy because of the lands that they conquered. And he said, وَمَنْ تَرَكَ مَالًا فَهُوَ لِوَرَثَتِهِ. Whoever leaves of wealth, then it belongs to his inheritors. The scholars can use this as an evidence for the mas'ala of the radd. The radd is when you divide the shares of inheritance, and once they've divided out, we still have some remainder left over. What do we do with this? Well, the scholars say, at least many of the scholars say, that you return this excess back to the inheritors so that actually they'll receive more than what they're due to receive. Because the Prophet says, whoever leaves wealth, then it belongs to his inheritors. So you do not give it to the Baytul Mal or anyone else. For example, if a deceased leaves behind a daughter and his son's daughter, then the inheritance would be that the daughter will receive a half and the son's daughter will receive a sixth, making up 2/3. But if there are no asaba who will take the rest, then what will happen to the rest of the third? This hadith tells us that we return it back to the daughter and the son's daughter in the same ratio. Other scholars, like the Shafi'i madhab, says that this third, the excess, will go to the Baytul Mal. The ulama who say rad, they say that the shares are returned back to the inheritors, except in the case of a spouse. The spouse does not receive more than his or her share. For example, we have a situation that the deceased leaves behind a wife and a mother. So the mother is going to receive a third, and the wife is going to receive a quarter. So that leaves us with 7/12, which are given as inheritance. So that leaves us with 5/12. What do we do with this excess 5/12? We return it totally back to the mother. As for the wife, she takes a quarter and she runs along. We can take from the hadith that the imam or some major personality in the deen, in the community, can leave off praying the janazah prayer for a person who has not left off enough money to pay off the debt, just as the Prophet did here. However, this rule only applies to a major personality, whereby if he does not pray the janazah on a particular person, the others are going to feel, wow, this is a big issue. Whatever wrong the deceased did, we need to make sure that we do not fall into that same mistake. Because this great personality, if he does not pray, it will serve as a ta'deeb, or as an admonition to the people, to straighten them up. As for if just any old tramp does not pray on this person, it will not have an effect on the wider community. There is a narration where Uthman radiallahu anhu, when he was the Khalifa, he gave the rad back to the husband. Where a woman died, she left behind this husband of hers. Uthman gave him the share of the husband, which is half. He also gave the rest of the money to him as well. Now the way to understand this narration would be that it is possible that the husband was also the cousin of the wife. If that is the case, he will receive his share as a husband and also the rest of the money as an asib. Now we move to the Kitabul Hibat, the book of gifts. And the first chapter is that it is hated for a man to give a sadaqah to someone but then buy it back. This narration here from Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu. He says, I donated a horse in the way of Allah, meaning this horse to be ridden on, fighting for the sake of Allah. He says its possessor was not treating it well, was not feeding it well, and so on. So he says, because of that, I wanted to buy the horse back. And I asked the Prophet about this, and the Prophet said, لا تبتعه ولا تعد في صدقتك فإن العائد في صدقته كالكلب يعود في قيئه. Do not purchase it and do not return back to your sadaqah, because the one who returns to his sadaqah, meaning takes it back, is like the dog who eats back its vomit. The sadaqah is when you give wealth to someone else seeking the reward of the hereafter. A hadiyah is when you give a gift to somebody seeking as an expression of love and affection to that person. A hibah is when you give a gift to someone with the intention of bringing a benefit to that someone. So for example, you may give him a pen as a gift. This will benefit him because he'll be able to write with it. And that's clearly a benefit. So what we say with this type of donation, giving a gift, is that it is permissible if it is from someone who is permitted to donate. So for example, if you're in charge of the wealth of an orphan, you are not permitted to use that wealth to donate or give gifts to someone else, because that is not in the interest of the orphan. So Umar radiallahu anhu says that he gave a faras atiq to another person so that he can ride it to fight in the way of Allah. The word atiq here means a high quality horse. Now here we find the Prophet tells him, لا تبتعه ولا تعد في صدقتك. Do not purchase this horse and do not return back to your sadaqah. One might ask, but how is Umar radiallahu anhu returning back to his sadaqah, taking back his sadaqah, when he's going to purchase the horse back? He's not going to take it back for free. Well, we can answer this in two ways. Number one, the person who's selling this horse, supposing he's selling it for £1,000, but then he sees you who gave him this horse as a sadaqah, and because of this, he shows goodwill towards you and sells it for £900, just out of showing goodwill to you because you are the one who gave him this sadaqah. That means you've profited or taken advantage of £100. It should have been sold for £1,000, but because it's you are the one who gave the sadaqah, it was sold for £900. So that's a £100 advantage which you have. So this is the £100 that you've taken advantage of from the sadaqah. And that is not allowed. You're not allowed to take advantage of the sadaqah which you have given away for the sake of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So how are you taking advantage of it now? It defeats the whole purpose of giving it away for Allah Jalla wa Ala. The second way of looking at this and answering this point is to say that you're not allowed to buy it for any price, because whatever you give away for Allah Jalla wa Ala, you should not have your heart attached to it. You should give and forget. In fact, we can make a parallel argument. We can say that the one who makes hijrah from his land to a land of Islam, then it is not allowed for him to return back to the land from which he made hijrah. Why is that? Because again, you left it for the sake of Allah, so do not return back to it and do not have your heart attached to what you have left off or given away for the sake of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So this applies to giving a gift or a charity, but it also applies to making hijrah. There is an exception to this general rule, and that is when a father gives a gift to his son, he is allowed to take it back. And we have a specific text for this. Actually, we can have another exception which we can rationally justify. Supposing a woman fears that her husband is going to divorce her, and she does not want that. Or for example, her husband, she fears, is going to marry against her, so take a second wife. And again, she does not want that. And so to pacify him, she gives him some wealth as a type of quote-unquote bribe for him not to divorce her or not to take a second wife. And this is perfectly fine, she can do this. However, supposing she does do this and her husband still divorces her or takes a second wife. Now, in a case like this, is the wife allowed to take back this gift which she gave her husband? The answer is yes. And the reason for this is because as if she is saying, look, I'm going to give you this particular gift on the condition that you do not divorce me or do not marry against me. Now, if the condition is now not respected, then of course she is allowed to take back the gift. So it's very similar to a trade. If you give somebody some money so that he gives you his computer, let's say, but then he refuses to give you the computer, are you allowed to take your money back? Well, the answer is yes. So it's a similar case here. Let's look at the next chapter about returning back to the gift which you have given. Such a person is like a dog who returns back to its vomit. From Ibn Abbas, the Prophet ﷺ said, الْعَائِدُ فِي هِبَتِهِ كَالْكَلْبِ يَقِيءُ ثُمَّ يَعُودُ فِي قَيْئِهِ. The one who takes back his gift is like the dog who vomits and then eats back its vomit. We take from this hadith the lesson which we took from the previous hadith. You do not return back to the gift or the sadaqah that you have given. You give and forget. That is the motto. Note here a fallacious argument which is made when it comes to the exception of the father. They say that the father is allowed to take back what he gives to his son because whatever he gives to his son, it remains his wealth anyway, because the Prophet said, أَنْتَ وَمَالُكَ لِأَبِيكَ, you and your wealth belong to your father. And so this is why the father can take back the wealth which he gives to his son. But this is a wrong argument, because then the Quran talks about inheritance and that the parents receive a sixth, as we read in Surah An-Nisa. So the fact that the parents are going to inherit from him a particular portion means that the wealth belongs to the actual son. It does not belong to the father. Then as for the hadith, أَنْتَ وَمَالُكَ لِأَبِيكَ, that means to say that the father can take from his son's wealth whatever he wants as long as he does not harm the son. Because this is the context of the hadith, when the father took the son's wealth and the son complained to the Prophet. So the hadith says that the father has the right to take from the son's wealth. But before he takes from the son's wealth, the wealth belongs to the son. The sadaqah here, in the previous hadith, refers to the obligatory sadaqah and the optional one as well. Also, just going back to the situation of the debt of the deceased person, can the debt of a deceased be paid from zakah? The answer is no. And if we allowed this, then no one will bother pay back the debt, because they'll just say, oh well, it will be paid back from the zakah funds. Let us move to the next chapter about giving preference to some of your children over others. This hadith from An-Nu'man ibn Bashir. He says that his father went to the Prophet to inform him that he has given a servant to his son. The Prophet asked him, أَكُلَّ وَلَدِكَ نَحَلْتَ مِثْلَ هَذَا? Have you given a similar gift to all your other children? He replied, لَا, no. The Prophet then said to him, فَارْجِعْ, then return him, meaning take this gift back. And in another wording, the Prophet said, اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَاعْدِلُوا بَيْنَ أَوْلَادِكُمْ, fear Allah and be just between your children. And in another wording, the Prophet said, فَلَا أَشْهَدُ عَلَى جَوْرٍ, I cannot be a witness to injustice. And in another wording, the Prophet said, أَيَسُرُّكَ أَن يَكُونُوا إِلَيْكَ فِي الْبِرِّ سَوَاءً? Would it please you that all your children should all be equal in treating you well, meaning birrul walidain? He replied, yes. The Prophet then said, فَلَا إِذَنْ, then no. That is to say, you cannot just give one of your children this servant as a gift to the exclusion of your other children. These ahadith of the chapter inform us in a clear-cut way that you have to be just when giving a gift to your children. And justice here means equality. The reason why the father went to the Prophet to make the Prophet witness this gift is because his wife and the mother of Nu'man ibn Bashir, she said she will not accept this until the Prophet gives the approval. The Prophet said, Inni la ashhadu ala jawr, I do not witness injustice. And we take the lesson from this that we also then, following the sunnah of the Prophet, do not witness injustice. We remove ourselves from places of injustice. For example, a riba transaction. You do not witness a riba transaction, because the Prophet said the one who takes riba, the one who gives riba, the witnesses of riba, and the one who writes it down, hum sawa, they are all equal. So witnessing such a transaction makes you as if you were undertaking it. So witnessing evil is actually a silent approval of it, which in effect is the same as if you were actually physically undertaking that particular evil action. Okay, what about if a person divorces his wife 3 times in one sitting, which we know is haram and a bid'i type of divorce, but he wants to make you a witness over this? Do you witness this? Well, witnessing over something haram in order to approve of it and to affirm it, this is haram. But witnessing over a haram action, such as our case here with the 3 divorces in one sitting, in order to establish the ruling which comes from that haram action, this is allowed. Because if you, in the case like this, did not witness, then this husband will simply deny that he divorced the wife, and the wife will still be with him. So in a case like this, you need to witness that he gave 3 divorces in one sitting. Now, if the Khalifa in this case implements the ruling that 3 divorces in one sitting means that she is irrevocably divorced, then so be it, and that will serve the husband right for undertaking such a stupid action. We take from the hadith that if you have boys, you must give them a gift equally, and if you have girls, you must give them gifts equally, and not exclude others. The debate comes when you have girls and boys as your children. Do you give them all equally, or do you say that the males receive twice the share of the females? Well, some scholars said that you have to give them all equally because this is what we understand from the hadith. Other scholars said that the Prophet said, اتقوا الله وَاعْدِلُوا بَيْنَ أَوْلَادِكُمْ, and لا أشهد على جور, I do not witness injustice. And he ordered the father to be just. And they say that no one is more just than Allah Jalla wa'ala, and He gives the male twice the share of the female. So even though it's not equality, it is still justice. And so therefore this is what you have to do, give the males twice the share of the female, just like inheritance. So they are trying to make the analogy between inheritance and giving a gift. Other scholars said no, inheritance is one matter, giving gifts is something else. And the word used in the hadith, which is walad, can apply to males and females. But in any case, it is an interesting debate. What we do take is that this rule applies to giving a gift. It does not apply to nafaqa, expenditure, because different children could have different demands. An older child may have a demand for a car, let's say, to go to work. So if the father buys him a car, but he has another child who is, let's say, 10 years old, he does not need a car at his age, he does not buy him a car. This is not about gift, this is from the area of nafaqa or expenditure on your children. And you do not need to be equal here, rather you need to treat each child on his or her merits. What this hadith is speaking about is purely a gift. If a father is unjust and gives a gift to one child to the exclusion of the other or others, then what is upon him to do is to take that gift back, just like the Prophet ordered the companion in this hadith. The alternative to that can be that he gives a similar gift to the other children, so he does not have to take back the first gift. Or another alternative is, if that gift can be divided up, then he will divide it and give each portion to the rest of his children, so they're all equal in that regard. So he's got 3 options available to him. Okay, what happens if the father dies before he has the opportunity to undertake one of these 3 options? Well, what we say is that this gift must be returned back to the wealth of the father, and it is then treated as part of his inheritance wealth. What we are not allowed to do is to approve of this gift, because this gift is batil, and we cannot approve of the batil. So we cannot approve of something which the Prophet has directly prohibited. Let's move to the next chapter of the Umrah, which means a life gift. Let's take some of these narrations. From Jabir ibn Abdullah, that the Prophet said, أَمْسِكُوا عَلَيْكُمْ أَمْوَالَكُمْ وَلَا تُفْسِدُوهَا فَإِنَّهُ مَنْ أَعْمَرَ عُمْرَةً فَهِيَ لِلَّذِي أُعْمِرَهَا حَيًّا وَمَيِّتًا وَلِعَقِبِهِ. He said, keep your properties to yourselves and do not spoil them or squander it. For he who confers a life gift upon another person, then that property will belong to the one to whom it is given, whether he lives or he dies, and it would then pass on to his successors. Also from Jabir, his statement, he says that the Umrah which the Prophet permitted is that a person says to another, this particular gift I confer to you and to your successors. As for if the person giving the gift says, this gift is for you as long as you should live, then the gift returns back to the giver after the death of the recipient. So what is this Umrah all about? This is a gift which the people used to give each other in the days of Jahiliyyah, and Islam approved of it, meaning to say did not abrogate it. It is a gift you give to somebody for the rest of his life. So if it is stipulated that this gift will be for the recipient and for his inheritors, then so be it. This is permissible, as we've just heard from the statement of Jabir ibn Abdullah. Both of the narrations, the first was the Prophet's words, and the second we quoted Jabir's narration, his words. As for if this stipulation is not made, so he simply says this is a life gift for you, then this gift returns back to the giver or to the bestower after the death of the recipient. So it becomes very similar to the ariya, something which you lend someone and take it back. But the ariya is madmuna, it is guaranteed. If it is destroyed, the person has to give a similar item back to the owner. But the Umrah is not madmuna, it is not guaranteed. Such that if it is destroyed, well then so be it. So that would be a great difference between the Umrah and the Ariyah. So it depends on the wording as to the ruling. If he says, this is for you as long as you live, then the gift returns back to the giver after the recipient dies. If he says, this is for you as long as you live and for your inheritors, then the gift passes on to his inheritors as part of the inheritance. However, if he simply just says, I give you this life gift, or I give you this Umrah, then this category is ambiguous. Does the gift return back to the giver, or does it move on to the recipient's inheritors? It's ambiguous, it's unclear. This is why we say that the one who gives such a gift needs to make it clear. Does he want it to return back to him after that person dies, or does he want this gift to go on to the inheritors of the recipient? You need to make it clear, otherwise it is ambiguous. But supposing such a thing does happen, how would we judge? Well, in the absence of any other indications, we would say what is apparent from the narrations of the Umrah is that the Umrah goes on to the inheritors of the recipient. And so we would go by that default ruling. Because the Prophet said, فَإِنَّهُ مَنْ أَعْمَرَ عُمْرَةً فَهِيَ لِلَّذِي أُعْمِرَهَا حَيًّا وَمَيَّةً وَلِعَقِبِهِ. Notice in the narration the Prophet said, أَمْسِكُوا عَلَيْكُمْ أَمْوَالَكُمْ وَلَا تُفْسِدُوهَا. Keep your wealth to yourself and do not squander it. He's saying, think carefully about when you want to give a gift, because if you're going to give a lifetime gift, you may never get it back, and then you'll end up regretting your decision. If you tell somebody, this is a gift for you and for your inheritors after you pass away, if you do that, you might just end up regretting it, because in future you may need that particular item which you have given. So do not just needlessly give gifts here and there, rather think about it carefully. You might say, but what about the hadith which talks about the one who takes back his gift is like a dog who eats back its vomit? And in the Umrah, are you not taking back your gift? Well, we say yes, the Umrah is like a gift, but it also has some resemblance to an Ariyah, which is a gift you give to someone, but you're going to take it back. It is not the same as an Ariyah, that is to say, lending something to someone. The difference between a normal hiba, a gift, and an Ariyah is that if somebody gives you an Ariyah, then you have to use it for the purpose he has given it to you for. So a pen, you use it to write down things with. What you are not allowed to do is to loan this pen or this item out to somebody else. Or, for example, for you to give this pen as an Ariyah to someone else, a third person. Whereas, if it was a gift, you would be allowed to do all of that. So an Ariyah is, you have to use it for the purpose it is given to you. Whereas if this pen is given to you as a gift, as a hiba, then you can loan it out to somebody, you can charge somebody else for using it, and so on. You have much more freedom. So the Umrah is a type of hiba which you can take back after the recipient dies. The recipient is allowed to lend it to other people and to also charge other people for using this item, but he's not allowed to sell it, because that would mean that he loses possession of it. And if he loses possession of it, then that would in turn means that the one who gave it to him will not be able to reclaim it. Let's just take a few extra points of benefit. There is a narration in Sunan Ibn Majah in which the Prophet is reported to have said, الرجل أحق بهبته ما لم يثب منها. A man has most right to his gift which he has given away, as long as he is not given anything in return for it. So it's telling us that you can take your gift back if the recipient has not given you anything in return for the gift. And this hadith, of course, completely opposes what we have read in Sahih Muslim, and it is no surprise then that this hadith is graded weak, so we do not act in accordance with it. It should also be noted that giving a gift to your children is not the same as expenditure on your children, because expenditure depends on the needs of your children, whereas a gift is not a necessity. It is something which is optional and extra. So you have to be fair and equal in that department with a gift, but you do not have to be equal with regards to expenditure. That is on the basis of need, and needs are of course different for different people. Now, the generality of the narration would suggest to us that males and females are equal in this with regards to giving gifts, and that the males do not receive twice the female. Other scholars would say that the males receive twice the female, and they make the analogy with the inheritance. And they would say that Allah is the most just of people, and if He says 2 to 1, then 2 to 1 is justice. That is understandable. However, one may argue back by saying that inheritance is not the same as gifts. They're two different things and would therefore require different rules. And the generality of this narration teaches us that you are equal to all your children. The hadith, you notice, did not make mention of males and females. So if it leaves it general, then we will leave it general. And this appears to be a weightier opinion, and Allah knows best. Also, when does a gift become binding? There's a difference of opinion. Some say merely when you declare that this is your gift, and other scholars say no, it has to be placed in the possession of that person. So you have to hand it over to him, whether it be the actual item, let's say a mobile phone, or the keys of the car, or the keys of a house, or a book, or whatever the item is, it needs to be handed over to that recipient. The Hanbali madhab says that the gift takes place by merely stating that you're giving the gift, and the other person stating that he accepts it. But they say you can actually change your mind before you've handed possession to him. As for after handing possession to him, you cannot change your mind. There is a stricter opinion which may actually be better. It makes the analogy with a trade and says that merely the agreement makes it binding, whether you've handed it over or not. And this is how a trade works, and so they make that analogy with the hiba. This opinion is stricter, but it does maintain consistency between trade and a hiba. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. Define the terms sadaqah, hadiyah, and hiba. Question number 2. What if a man does not give out gifts to his children equally, and before sharing them out equally he dies? What should be done? Question number 3. Explain what al-umrah is, and then explain how it differs from ariyah and how it differs from a normal hiba.